we will read about the 5 components in the life of a human being that become warfare agents. Over and over again, we hear and read that we should think about the way we feel, sense, think, speak, and act. In connection with our senses, these 5 components can turn into explosives, because they are energies that we emit, and, ultimately, whose effect they, from the arsenal of feelings, or the arsenal of thoughts, words, or even actions, projectiles are fired off against people, animals, and nature, which, however, also hit people and stimulate them to think in the same or similar way, or even to command someone to do something bad. For example, to maltreat animal species, or to practice predatory exploitation of Man poisons himself and his environment through his 5 components, which turn into warfare. But the 5 components of sensing, feeling, speaking, and acting can also be positive companions, above all when they are applied according to the eternal law of love for God and neighbor. Negative contents of thoughts that are harbored against our neighbor can consist of expectations, envy, or hostility up to rejection and hatred. They energetically form and are applied at some point, be it through words or actions. The thought is the lead man that processes everything that romps around as the content of his world of desires and thoughts. The 5 components, which have a simultaneous effect on our sensory. The same is true of the exploitation of the soil. The soil gives its richness, but that is not enough for man. Driven by your listeners, on this program we continue learning from our book, also about ourselves. We human beings live in pictures. All the behavior patterns of every individual consist of countless picture sequences. We could say that they consist of a film that we unwind again and again through the content of the 5 components: sensing, feeling, thinking, speaking and acting, but also unceasingly activate, whereby ever new picture sequences are added. If you do not believe what was just explained, then just try to think slowly and consciously. With these exercises, manifestations of life, as well as what we heard by way of second or third parties, and of which we make a picture for ourselves, we include in our life film, but also what we acquire, what we purchase, what we consume, what we move are picture sequences, which show up again in our life film, on our film reel. Dear fellow people, the effects of the contents of our 5 components that go out from us are way more far-reaching than we would at first assume. If we grasp that we are building up weapons arsenals with our sensations, feelings, thoughts and words, and if we realize that everything is energy and no energy is lost, we will also understand the functions of negative energy, in that the negative energy potential, which is created by the negative feeling, sensing, thinking, speaking and acting at every moment of 7 billion people, becomes visible as material manifestations in the weapons arsenals of this world.
The
most varying content of this negative energy stimulates the corresponding people who develop weapons. Then new ideas, again developed for ever further are the product of thoughts, feelings, and the systematic actions of human beings, fed by the sum of the negative energy of all their agents that romp about as a murderous content in the 5 components of all of mankind. Often, hardly perceivable and inconspicuous, mostly dismissed, people act unscrupulously against their neighbor, and hardly anyone thinks about the fact that the willful killing of our neighbor is fratricide. German weapon technology in particular is in great demand by those governing many a country. German arms exports are among the highest. Already long ago, the government of a country that refers to Jesus, the Christ, and produces war weapons, threw down the gauntlet to the Nazarene, who taught the people, "All who take up the sword will perish by the sword." Or, "Whatever you have done to one of these, the least of my brothers, you have done to me." Vast sums of money, the same as energy, are required for the sophisticated war weapons. This means that no money is available for starving people and has thrown down the gauntlet to the Nazarene. And the earth, which is part of God's creation, has taken it up and thrown it back to the people. Man has turned his provider, the Mother Earth, into an enemy. The earth will be victorious over the enemy. This is already indicated with the one word, climate change. Dear fellow people, in this program, which is a reading from the book, The Speaking All Unity, the Word of the Universal Creator Spirit,
studies, contacted institutes, and evaluated press reports. What can be said about it? What is the environmental situation worldwide?
The upper limit. In Beijing, there was a top reading of 577 fine particulates. The answer.
Accordingly, there must have then been an above-average number of cases of cancer in China.
That's actually correct. The number of cases of cancer is very high in hundreds of Chinese villages, and in Internet there's even a list of 247 cancer villages whose existence has meanwhile been confirmed by the Ministry of the Environment in China. We can say that since the beginning of the economic reforms, 10 million tons of grain have to be destroyed annually due to heavy metal contamination. The heavy metals come from mining, for instance, from heavy industry and also from the chemical industry. Just imagine this number. Huge amounts of grain are being destroyed here simply because no significance is attached to environmental protection. And in other places, people are dying of hunger. The soil in China is also extremely contaminated with heavy metals. And China alone has 620 coal-fired power plants that practically represent the motor for the Chinese economy. Even more mercury is released through gold mining, namely 820 tons annually. The United Nations Environmental Program estimates that 10 to 15 million people work in small enterprises mining gold. The ore containing gold is mixed with mercury, and the mercury is then evaporated, leaving behind the gold residues.
Commonplace. Here and there, a few cows search for something edible amongst the rubbish. The contamination in the air and soil exceed the allowable limits, partly by 50-fold. About 50,000 people live from the rubbish at this contaminated site. As these amateur photos show, children search for usable parts so as to earn some money. An inhabitant of Agbabloshi reports.
We are in Ekbogloshi since March 2014. This has been the largest electrowaste site in the world.
So this is an area where no grass grows anymore because of all the trash, but where there are apparently no alternatives than to live in this trash and partly from this trash, and the health dangers are simply hazarded.
Yes, it's really a diabolic system in which the environment is ruthlessly contaminated as well as the people. It is diabolic that huge amounts of electro-waste are illegally and cheaply shipped to Africa, and the people's poverty is practically exploited. The whole thing is really a disaster of indescribable proportions.
But Accra is... Perhaps at this point we can go into more detail regarding the health consequences of this global pollution. Several illnesses were already mentioned, but perhaps you could simply give us an overview again of what the resulting illnesses are for mankind.
Environmental toxins cause not only cardiovascular diseases and respiratory ailments or cancer, but are also responsible for an increase in behavioral and developmental disorders in children.
Consequences. We can really say that the poison that man puts into the environment apparently comes back to us. It makes us sick. But one rarely thinks about this until it affects oneself or one's own children.
Yes, unfortunately, that's true. As a physician, I have to say that. Basically, the best preventive health measure would be to question our own actions or our own lifestyle. Everything that we do has an effect, and we simply have to change some things. We are part of our environment, also part of the earth, and it's very logical and actually a spiritual principle that when the human being is a product of this earth, and thus identical to it. If the earth is sick, then the product, the human being, also becomes sick. And so there are very important statements in this book that are now being confirmed by science. Today, science, too, acknowledges that we are linked with everything. Thus, man is in constant communication with the earth. There is an interaction here, and this interaction, quantum physics can explain this, takes place via quantum mechanical fields which overlap each other, so to speak.
And obviously, this interaction is seen very clearly in matter.
Are imported 1,674 tons of rice products, 10,277 tons of fresh vegetables, and 18,071 tons of baked goods and other grain products.
So that's the flip side to global trade. In addition, there's the fact that pesticides are allowed in China's agriculture that are banned in Europe, for instance, and also that more pesticides may be applied per kilogram of vegetables. So the standards are very different.
Yes, that's certainly also a reason why the food industry here tends to make a secret of how many products from China are in what they offer. Nevertheless, there are very many products from China that are meanwhile common. For
only in our own country, then our thinking is definitely too limited.
Our thinking is too limited, for we all live on the same planet, and the U.S. is an important producer and emitter of contaminants, and above all, also China. Meanwhile, China is now the #1 in producing fine particulates and smog. The environmental pollution in East Asia is a main reason why the air pollutants worldwide have stayed at a very high level, even though, for instance, in the United States, Europe and Japan, environmental place. There is the famous St. Florian principle, which is now being practiced by the industrial countries, that says, we want cheap consumer products in large numbers, but an intact environment. And for this to work at all, we accept that the people in China are poisoned. But the whole thing is turning into a boomerang, because, as we mentioned before, the contaminants no country borders, and the fact is that half of all jackets, socks and trousers come